Okay, I'll just get you to say your name for me. I want to make sure I pronounce it properly.
Alina Nikishina.
Nikishina. That's a cool last name. I really like that.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So, Alina, thank you so much for coming back to chat with me on the Emotions Untapped podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation. This is a different one because you and I had a core transformation therapy session, and we're going to talk about that on the show today. Core transformation method, this is what you specialize in. So you do this work on yourself with clients. Like I said, we did a session together, which I'm really excited to talk about a little later. So I just wanted to welcome you back to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. I'm stoked to talk about this. I'm really excited to hear your feedback on my experience from our session that we did a couple of weeks ago. But first and foremost, I want to share that when we first connected, I actually had not heard of this type of holistic healing. I've explored many healing modalities, and this actually was not one of them. So it was really cool to come across this. So for those listening that are in my same shoes that I was in a few weeks ago, having not heard of this method, I'd love for you to tell us exactly what it is and how it helps people transform.
Yeah. So core transformation is a gentle process that feels very kind to our system that allows us to work with different aspects of ourselves, or one could say parts of ourselves, to, dissolve any kind of like inner resistance or struggle. Sometimes we even use this language. You who's listening might even notice yourself using this language of like, a part of me wants to, I don't know, jump careers, or like a part of me wants to start a business or ask that person out or try something new. And then another part of me is scared of change, or like thinks that it's not going to work out. Or I hear this inner criticism that's like, who do you think you are, dreaming like that, or wanting to do that new thing? It's not gonna work. So you could say that those are different parts of you that are having those different thoughts and feelings, and also inspiring these different behaviors and habits to happen, right? Like what me and you worked on was, you had a habit that you're like, I do this kind of compulsively. So a part of me wants to, and then another part of me is like, what are you doing? Like, this is not adding value to your life, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so, sometimes that can create some, well, some havoc, right? And like just a life that's not fully fulfilling because you're not doing what you want to be doing. You're kind of stuck. So,
So it's like a
yeah.
disconnect almost between perhaps who you kind of are and who you want to be.
Yeah. Because sometimes, well, most of the time, we kind of cling on to the past identity of who we used to be, right? Who we grew up as children, who we were when we were teenagers or young adults, even, right? What we learned when we were in school, or in my case, when I was employed as an accountant and then jumped to being my own business owner. That's a very different identity change. And so there were a lot of parts of me that resisted my transition to to entrepreneurship and doing things in a different way. So that's another place where core transformation can help, is like, I was able to communicate with those parts of me that still wanted to do things a certain way from my past, and was able to come to a more natural resolve. Because prior to getting into core transformation and doing this parts work, I was doing a lot of coaching and other self-development. And through that was able to gain a lot of awareness, self-awareness, emotional awareness, this kind of stuff. And it always came to the same conclusion. They were like, okay, you're doing this thing, right? You're thinking this thing. And I'm like, yes, I do know. And they're like, okay, it doesn't serve you. I'm like, yeah, I know. And then they're like, what do you want to do that's different? And I would say, I want to do this other thing instead. And they'd be like, okay, so practice doing that for the next week or two. And while that usually worked for that week or two, I would find myself kind of getting back into the same habits. That inner criticism voice would come back up. Um, ultimately I kind of started feeling like I wasn't doing something well enough, like maybe I wasn't getting it or something.
Hmm.
And so I started getting kind of down on myself. And then I realized, oh no, this is happening on a subconscious level. And this is why, up to this point, this other kind of coaching has not been able to help me fully. So that's why I got into this form of subconscious work through working with our parts.
Yeah, and so like you said, the other forms of coaching weren't quite getting you there, almost like they weren't getting to the core issue.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like they were uncovering, they did a great job of uncovering. But then these subconscious parts of me still wanted to do the thing. It was like I was trying to suppress them by saying, stop, I'm not criticizing myself. I'm going to be kind to myself. And it does help. It does help to be aware and to interrupt yourself and to reframe onto a more positive path. It just takes a lot of willpower and force. And that's another reason why core transformation is so great, is because you can create this interchange without relying on willpower or force all the time. It's kind of just a natural thing that happens. Like you kind of just naturally stop having this compulsion to do a certain task or think a certain thought, or maybe you even notice that the feeling that you have at the end of the day, maybe whereas before it was kind of like this hmm, unease or like something that doesn't feel right, it just
Hmm.
kind of transforms into more ease and more presence. And there's not really an explanation as to why that happens. It's just subconscious change. That's how that happens. So
So this is so reflective of some of the notes that I've written down from our session that I'll be sharing a little bit later on. And just, yeah, that ease and flow, once you kind of drop into it, it's almost like you said. Okay, so having the awareness was the first step, right? You had the awareness around these kind of beliefs and these behaviors and these habits, these thought patterns, etc. But it was like you were kind of stuck in it. It was like you had the awareness, but you didn't really quite know how to shift out of actually making the changes. And this is exactly what this method does. Um, so really bringing it to the core state of being. So when we talk about the core state of being, what are some of those states? And how have you been able to, practice accessing those states on a daily basis?
yeah, so for the person listening who is wondering maybe what a core state is, so a core state is something that we experience when we do core transformation, and it happens naturally. So when we start speaking to one of our parts, let's say there's like a part that a part that wants to, I don't know, snack at night or something like that, right? So we can speak to this part and we can ask it, what do you want? And then the part will answer something, and then we'll say, great part, you can have this. So we invite you to, in your imagination, just step into what it would be like to already have what you want. And then it just kind of happens in imagination. And then we ask, what do you want that's even deeper through having this? And then the part will answer. And so we just keep going like this, like, what? Okay, great, have this. And then what do you want that's deeper? And eventually, the deeper we go, every single part reaches what's called a core state of being. And this is because at the core level, there's not really anything that we have to get or achieve or have in order to just be. And this may
Mm,
sound kind of maybe woo or esoteric to some people, but really it's just like a state that we naturally kind of come into this world with. As babies, we just have to be. There's nothing that we have to do or have or anything like that to be accepted, or right. We just are. And even in like philosophies and religions that practice deep meditation, these are the states that they are seeking to basically find. Some might call it enlightenment, etc., but it doesn't have to be like that. It's literally just like peace or wholeness or being, like you were saying, or okayness. I am more spiritual, so for me things resonate like connection to source or God or you know universal love. So not love that like uh, you receive or give between people, but love that just is. So
Mm,
um and this is something that is viscerally felt in the body. Like it's a actual experience. This is not like a mental concept. um for a lot of people it just feels like something that's very like a deep meditative state that they didn't try to get into. It just kind of happens. For other people it's like very ecstatic, like a sense of joy or like freedom or openness. um and it changes every time. Every single part could have a different core state. So some of my parts too, like they just surprise me. Some of them will be like a lot of them will be like this connection to source or like being, but there's some that are like, I want to be the unique expression of source or something like that. And I don't know, it just feels joyful and like light and um, I don't know, pure.
like a place of peace, and like I feel some would perhaps describe it as, just your higher consciousness, like it's just like a level of consciousness that just is, like you said, it's just a state. It's not necessarily like a feeling or a thought. It is just a way of being.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why we guide parts to this core state is because from that core state, we can then invite this part to reflect on everything that it wanted before the core state. And we can kind of ask, like, hey, part, once you have this core state of peace, how does that change things when it comes to you wanting, I don't know, to be approved or like to be loved by someone or to have peace, or I'm sorry, have safety or wanting to eat snacks at night, right? Like usually the part says something to the tune of, oh, yeah, I see this a lot differently now. Like this is not
Mm,
something that I need to grasp onto. It's just something that I can have, or like, oh, this is not required anymore. Or like, oh, I can see myself choosing better options for my nutrition, these kinds of things. And this not only happens in the session, but it also translates to the real world. Like you just notice yourself. What happens for me anyway, and for most of my clients that share their experiences with me, what happens is there's more choices that open up for us. So whereas before, maybe the person who had the problem with the night snacking, right? Like, whereas before it seemed like the only option was to go to the pantry and get some cookies. I mean, they knew that they could just choose not to get the cookies, but that choice was like, no, I'm going to get the cookies, right? And now it's like there's a little voice that's like, do you want the cookies or do you want some water? Like, are you just bored or are you actually hungry? All right. There's a shift that happens generally, and it's not that after one session everything magically transforms necessarily, although it could happen. Um, Usually there's some kind of shift. So yeah.
yeah. Very similar to my experience as well, which we will get into shortly. I did want to ask you though, because you mentioned it briefly just before, that you were in accounting prior to this
Hmm.
work. So I'd love for you to share how you actually got into this kind of work and some of the major transformations that you've experienced for yourself and perhaps some of your clients as well.
Yeah. So, right. So I changed careers in 2018. It's not something that I expected would happen. But that's just how circumstances were. I actually started another business with some partners before doing coaching. And that's where I kind of got to really see the wide range of skills that I actually have. I just
Hmm.
kind of needed to awaken them because what I was doing was like creating entrepreneurship online courses. And so that required me to do a bunch of like creative writing and like recording my voice and design work, and like I was doing little animated videos. So very different from accounting.
Yeah.
Although, I was already kind of getting into like marketing and sales at my old firm, but like still just nothing to this degree. And you know, after I started getting into building that business and was experiencing a lot of just inner struggle. And I didn't really know what was going on because I wasn't super involved with self-development back then. I didn't really need to be. Like I was enjoying living my little life where things were predictable and I knew who I was and I was going to the office and doing my work and um everything was fine. And when this big transition came is when I started to question a lot about like who am I really and what else am I capable of if I have these other skills and why am I having trouble with I don't know some relationships and um, there was just a lot that started coming up and naturally as I was getting coached and then I went into coaching after leaving that partnership like a lot became unearthed. And I also noticed as I was building my own business, solopreneur, not in the partnership that I was in, things were a lot different, right? Because you're alone. You don't have people checking in with you to do like check-in meetings, and there's not necessarily a plan unless you know exactly what you're doing. But I didn't. In essence, I kind of restarted my career. I mean, I was doing like business coaching using my old skills as an accountant.
Hmm.
But I kind of already knew, like people were telling me, oh, Lena, you should be a money coach and teach people taxes and bookkeeping because you're really good at that. And I knew deep down inside in my gut that like, it's not what I wanted to do. That did not fire me up. Um, and my coach training already kind of taught me some of these subconscious ideas and I just thought it was fascinating. I'm like, I want to get into that. And yeah, and it wasn't until I basically overcoached myself to death, um, and nothing was helping with, patterns of like comparison or like just low self-worth or not feeling like I had something of significance to bring to the world. Um, you could see how when you have constant inner talk like that, that's negative, how that could impact you as a business owner. I
Mm.
mean, the results are you don't put yourself out there, you don't talk about yourself, um, and good luck showing up as authority or that you are actually passionate about what you're doing. Because if you don't know what you're doing, I mean, the business is non-existent at that point, right?
Yeah.
And then as somebody who used to value or who used to define success by how I'm doing professionally, that is a huge ego blow. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So uh, you're asking me how I got into this work. I mean, it was basically an invitation to be like, hey, do you want to dissolve some of these old programs that are keeping you stuck in this paradigm that like success equals financial independence and a certain role in society and like how people see you. Um, and it's not just success, it's also self-worth. Like I define my self-worth on that.
Hmm.
Um, and to me, that meant like permission to exist. And I know that felt like that may sound very dramatic or I don't know, but that's how it was in my inside experience. So uh, probably because as a kid, the way that my parents defined success was how well I was doing in school
Hmm.
and how I was compared to other people specifically. So,
Right.
like, how are you compared to these people in your class? How are you compared to your sister? How are you compared to the kids of my friends and family groups, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you doing okay?
Yeah.
And just basically being told that like a worthwhile person is somebody who's doing well in society, because otherwise you're basically just a leech. So, I get why these lessons were taught, and I understand now the reasoning behind their perspective of life. But I didn't as a child. And in turn, that turned into subconscious programming, which then, translated into my experience as an adult.
Right.
Basically saying, Alina, you're a failure and a person who doesn't deserve to exist or have anything good in your life because you can't be good at this business thing right away. Like, eh.
Mm.
So good luck going to coaching and them telling you like, well, that doesn't serve you. Maybe stop thinking like that and start thinking more positively and you'll start getting more clients. And like, yeah, I appreciate that.
It's really incredible how our limiting beliefs like really do shape our reality in a sense.
Mm,
And it's what you said is so relatable. I mean, pretty much all of our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs and concepts about ourselves and what we are worth and what we are deserving of literally does come from childhood. Like it's all pre-programmed in. And it's so interesting as well how essentially it was your limiting beliefs that, in a roundabout way, led you to doing this work, which is in fact annihilating and rewiring these limiting beliefs, which I just think is such an incredible full circle story. I mean, it's just fascinating, really.
I love it too. The universe has an interesting sense of humor, and I laugh a lot. That's one of my secrets.
I love that so much. Well, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I'd love to transition to talking a little bit more about the session that we had and my experience. And yeah, we haven't spoken about this yet. So this is in real time for the first time, me sharing with her kind of my takeaways and my experience. And I'm so excited to get your feedback and yeah, just hear what you have to say. So I kind of wrote some notes out here. I have some point form notes and I kind of wrote them in categories of my feelings, my thoughts, and my behavior post session. So perhaps we maybe just kind of go through one at a time because there's quite a lot here in each rather than just me
Yeah,
ramble through the whole list.
let's
Um,
do it.
and it's really cool because it's actually very on par with some of the things that you said earlier in this conversation, which I think you'll pick up on. So I'm just going to go ahead and start reading what I've got here. So
Okay.
first we'll start with feeling. So immediately after the session, I was actually sitting right in this chair in my closet studio here, and I felt very light in my body. Um, I was very present on like a nervous system level, if that
Mm,
makes sense. Like as if all of the cells and like the blood moving through my body and my organs were just kind of like slowed down a little bit, and I was very just present in my body, I guess you could say, which was a very interesting feeling, something that I'm not feeling very often at all. So it was as I'm sitting there intentionally trying to notice what was happening, it was very prevalent that that was what I was feeling, which was really cool. I felt absolutely no anxiety or no rush. I'm often in my head
mm,
a lot, just thinking, oh, what do I got to do next? Oh, I haven't done enough today, or I got to do more later. Like I'm always almost like a to-do list is kind of just always running through in a loop in my mind. And in that moment, I didn't have that. There was no rush to be anywhere else or do anything else. There was no anxiety around, have I accomplished enough today? What do I have tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. I also felt a knowing, even though it was like a feeling, kind of a thought, a knowing, but still a feeling that I was exactly where I was meant to be in terms of like my goals, my projects, and my progress on those goals and projects. Um, specifically around the podcast, we spoke just before we hit record about how I've spent a lot of time preparing for this show and getting it ready for launch. And I'm always kind of like, oh, I haven't done enough, or like I need to do more, it has to be perfect, etc. And in that moment, I was like, I'm good, Liv. Like I'm good. Like there is no more you have to be or more you have to do. So just knowing that I was where I was meant to be. Um, and then this one, it's kind of the last one here, but it's a little bit hard to describe, to put to words, but it was almost as though it's cool because like you've talked about the different parts. And so it was almost like I don't know what the word is, like a melding of parts. And so it was kind of like I suddenly understood myself better,
mm,
almost like if you had a best friend and your best friend kind of just told you this secret that you've known this person your whole life, and for the first time ever, they're sharing this information with you that you never had before. And you now have like an insight into that person's being, except it was me. It was like
Hmm.
I was the best friend and I just suddenly understood myself a little bit better. So that was kind of what I had for the feeling aspect.
Wow. I just want to take that in for a second.
Sure.
Um, Very cool. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for, I really appreciate you for taking the time to like write down in that much detail your experience. That is so cool to hear back. Um, what do I want to say? Yeah. So, firstly, core transformation is not like an intentionally meditative or like hypnotic type of method. It just so happens that we feel really relaxed as we get in and kind of turn inward and start speaking to these parts.
Hmm.
And the core state kind of makes it seem like, um, I don't know what you would call it, like a deep meditative state. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, it does slow down your nervous system and put it into that rest and digest mode.
Hmm.
So, it's also highly healing in that way because when we're in rest and digest, our body can self heal. It's the same state that happens when we sleep. So, um, thank you for reflecting on that. And gosh, what was the second thing you were saying? Just the synopsis of it with the feeling.
So just lighter in my body, present on a nervous system level, and then just like no anxiety, no rush
Oh,
as to
right.
like my to-do list and just my.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say, is that even though we weren't necessarily working on that topic, right?
Mhm.
We weren't working on the topic of you having mind chatter about your to-do list and stuff like that. Oh, the podcast, that's what you were saying is that like I actually felt like, oh, you're okay. Things are gonna work out. You can focus. That was not the topic of our session. However, it's typical that when we do core transformation, other things in our life can begin to change even if we don't directly work with that topic. And
Right. Okay, cool.
yeah, and that thing you were describing at the end with kind of a melding, I was thinking of the word integration.
Yes.
It's like
It's a way better word.
yeah, like integration into the whole of who you are. And you're saying like getting to know myself better. Yeah. I mean, it's basically I noticed or I mentioned earlier that it's a kind process. It's because we are acknowledging these different aspects of ourselves that we usually try to shut down because uh, they're not very welcome by society, right?
Right.
Like our negative feelings are not welcome in society in general as a rule, right? In safe
Right.
circles they are, but like emotional awareness and being emotional is not something that's celebrated, I would say.
No, no, not right now, not yet. Let's go a
Yeah.
couple decades from now. Hopefully things will change. But yes, you're totally right. As it stands right now on a societal level, you're totally right on that. Yes.
Yeah. So it can feel like we are getting to know ourselves better because we are usually just taught to suppress, push down, shove away,
Hmm.
not feel it, not talk to it, like basically say I refuse to acknowledge your existence and we're going to go in ahead and go in this direction. And usually it just doesn't work. Like you can suppress in one way and it's just going to pop out another way, you know?
Yeah.
Even if you can suppress your negative self-talk, I don't know, you might have a physical symptom that shows up that you're like, I have no idea where this came from, and the doctors can't tell you why,
Mm, yeah,
you know? So
totally. Yeah.
it always comes out.
Cool. Well,
Thank you.
that's cool. Yeah. Thanks for your feedback on that. And I got so excited to jump into this part of the conversation that I didn't even let the audience know what exactly it was that we were working on in this
Oh,
session.
yeah.
So we'll get to that now because I forgot to mention it before. So what I had brought up was I smoke weed and I vape, and it's not a habit that I want to continue. It's something that I started doing, not the vaping, but the smoking when I was a teenager. And I've kind of gone through life, like having big breaks here and there and whatever, but it is something that is a part of who I am, and it's something that I do, and it doesn't make me feel the way it used to make me feel when I was younger. It gives me so much more anxiety when I do it. I regret it 10 minutes later, and I'm kind of spaced out and I'm tired, and I don't enjoy the outcome of what I get from, using this substance. And I'd really like to pull back on that. So that is what we were working on. Um, Now we'll continue into thoughts
Yeah, let's do
if
it.
you're ready. So my thoughts, my mind was very quiet, obviously, feeling just presence and lighter in my body kind of goes hand in hand with also the mind being very quiet. So that was, it was kind of funny because like my mind was quiet, but here I am sitting trying to check in with myself at the same time. Like I didn't do it right away. I did allow myself like a bit of time to just like sit and just be in that state. And then shortly after I started kind of writing things down. But my thoughts, I did notice were very kind. Like you had actually mentioned this earlier in the conversation, right? Actually at the very beginning that, um, you know, this method is about being kind to our system was the words that you said, and that's actually what I felt in from a thought point of view. So my thoughts were the opposite of like negative self-talk. I was actually being very kind about my desire to smoke and vape. um I guess as well. So I knew I wasn't going to kick the habit right away. Like I knew it wasn't just going to be like a light bulb moment, and that was okay. And then there was like this level of grace that I was giving myself to make small incremental changes. Like it was kind of like, okay, I don't just have to all of a sudden like kick this habit, but I can now be more aware and feel into these thoughts and feelings when the impulse arises, that I can kind of just give myself a little bit of grace around the decision I'm going to make or how I'm going to like process the decision, if that makes sense. So there was definitely like a level of kindness there again, and just like grace in my thoughts, like right away. You know what I mean? Like right after this session, it wasn't like now I got up to go grab a smoke and I'm like, it was like right then I was like, okay, I know this is going to come up, but I get to be okay with that. I get to accept that for what it is. And I get to be kind about how I make the decision, whether I choose to pick it up or I don't. Like either way is okay. I'm going to get there in the long run, kind of thing, which was just a really nice feeling and really nice thought. Um, so when the core state as well, this one relates to is that, so I wrote the desire to vape slash smoke was connected to my desire to reach my high of consciousness, essentially. Although the act itself was kind of contradicting that access, which is kind of, so then it's like a hypocritical act. So it just kind of like didn't even make sense. Um, and then the last thing I wrote was like I wasn't being hard on myself
Mm.
about it. So those were kind of the thoughts that were there at the moment. Which yeah, like I said, it relates back to what you said at the beginning, is that we just get to be, it gets to be kind on our bodies and on our nervous system.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, one of the main principles of core transformation is that all of our parts have a positive purpose. So that kind of adds to the kindness element is
Hmm.
maybe at the few, because we go into deeper layers, right, as we go through the session, but like maybe on the few surface level layers, it's not so positive. Maybe this part wants to be angry and like throw things around, or I don't know, not be kind to someone else, or I don't know, do things like just binge or like overindulge or whatever it is that they want to do. Although we might not see that as quote unquote positive, they do want something positive through that behavior if we just keep going deeper. And
Hmm.
yeah, it is kind to acknowledge this part and be like, okay, I'm going to just let you in imagination land because we're not hurting anybody out there. You can have whatever you want. And then we're going to see what you want through this because there is something deeper that you're trying to achieve. So if you kind of think about it, these parts are are trying to achieve that core state because they all just want to be. We all just want to be. Well, I shouldn't say we, but like souls just want to be. And um, we think that we have to somehow, like in our childhood or early adulthood, we learned that we have to do certain things or get certain things in order to have this. And so it is inefficient and maybe sometimes contradictory, like you said,
Mm,
um, to go about reaching these core states through these various behaviors. And just if you think about it, like if the part wants like 10 different things before it reaches the core state, then that's the process it tries to go through. First, it
mhm.
tries to get binging, then it tries to get, I don't know, security, then it tries to get acceptance from others. And like most parts don't make it through, I don't know, most of those layers.
Right.
So then it's no wonder why we feel like maybe we're not fully ourselves, or we're not fully integrated, or we're pulled, like we have just inner resistance or like inner struggle, inner battles, right? Um, because there's parts of us that are like, hey, this is no longer aligned for you. Hey, there's better ways. And the other parts are like, no, we know what's best, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Cool. Well, the last part was the behavior. So I'll just go through that. I've just got a few quick notes on that one too.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I brought up to you when we were starting the session was, kind of some of the triggers and like kind of things that happen that like make me want to do this. And one of them was that essentially like when I see someone else vaping, I'm like, oh, yeah, I want that too. And so this is something that I thought was really fascinating. I didn't automatically want to vape or smoke when I saw someone else doing it. I almost didn't even notice that they were, where normally like I would see it and I would just like, oh, like the impulse was like, where's mine?
Mm,
Like right away. Like it was, that was the cue. And then the habit was to do it myself. And I spent quite a bit of time around someone who does vape. And yeah, I was like, I almost didn't even notice that they were, or I didn't, it didn't affect me. And I thought that was really cool. Cause I was like, whoa, check that out. Like, so that was really cool. And I definitely didn't reach for it as often in the first, like, I would say like 3 to 5 days.
yeah.
Um, just on my own, like without a trigger. Cause like, I don't know, sometimes it's like, it'll get to the end of the day and I'm like, oh, I just want to relax, so like I'll go have a little puff or whatever. I didn't have that inclination in those first couple of days after. And when I did reach for it, a little bit back to the thoughts again, but when I did reach for it, my thoughts were quite almost diplomatic. Like I was almost mediating myself a little bit. Like I was almost kind of going back to like, okay, like what do I really want here? Like almost like how the session went, right? Like
Uh-huh.
just kind of asking myself those questions of like, why am I reaching for this right now? Like what is it that I'm actually trying to get out of this? And just kind of going a few layers deep on that. So that was really cool because I felt like the session itself then kind of gave me the tools to be able to practice it on myself a little bit. Obviously, I'm not trained in doing so, but I think that with a
Yeah,
couple of more sessions, I'll kind of pick up on it a little bit more, and I'd be able to coach myself
absolutely.
through it a little bit more. So I did notice these thoughts and feelings and behaviors were actually really strong at first, and then of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, as the days went on, they did become like less intense. Old thought patterns did start to kind of creep in, but I can definitely, for that reason, see the value in doing multiple sessions.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think in doing so, you kind of learn how to move through these things on your own. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my full synopsis.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so happy to hear that you've had those shifts. Very cool to notice, and very cool that you've been able to like observe yourself like that. That takes some skill. So, and I really appreciate it because I'm not usually gifted with such detailed feedback. So thank you. Um,
Well,
and
thank you for this session. And I was thinking that too. I'm like, oh, her clients probably don't like give this kind of, feedback in such an in-depth manner.
yeah,
So
no, not in this
probably is.
depth. They're usually like, oh, this is shifting, or yeah. But yeah, so for sure. multiple sessions could be helpful for, especially with things that, you said, I think you said you started smoking when you were a teenager?
I was like 13.
Okay. Yeah.
So most of my life at this point now, like more of my life than not.
Right. And
Yeah.
it kind of sounds like it's not necessarily like a daily habit of like the same as cigarettes, where maybe you would smoke throughout the day, but it's more like it has to do with something more social, right? Or maybe like a relaxing thing at the end of the day. So,
Yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with like my environment as well. Like if I'm out at camp and I'm sitting around the
mm,
fire, it's like you said, social when you're in that environment. There's a few drinks flowing, that kind
yeah,
of thing. Definitely, if I'm just at home having a quiet night and early to bed and I've been working all day and I'm tired, I don't even really think about it. I'm just like, oh, can't wait for a good night's sleep. But when I'm, you
right.
know, yeah, out
Right.
doing
So
stuff and
there's
with people.
exactly. So there may be multiple associations in your subconscious to that habit. It's not just about like the impulse to want to like experience that in your body, whatever feeling you get when you get high, but like um just being around people and being on the same like vibe or frequency, or like not wanting to feel left out, or not wanting to like explain yourself as to why you don't want to do it, or the judgment. I mean, I don't know what it could be. It could
Mm,
be myriad of things, but yeah, sometimes it does require more sessions, and I'm glad to hear that you were able to kind of ask this this part of you, like, what do you want through doing this? Because yeah, you said you're not trained, but like you could definitely do this as a self practice.
hmm.
Some people just purchase the book that Connie Ray Andreas, who created this method, wrote, along with her sister Tamara. Um, some people just purchase that and literally learn how to do it. So, the benefit of having a guide is that you have this space held for you. Usually we put self-development work on the back burner, when it's important, and
Hmm.
that day never comes. It's one of those like urgent but not important, or non-urgent, not urgent but important quadrant tasks,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And everything else comes before it. So there's a lot of benefit to working with a guide. Um,
Hmm.
that helps you stay accountable and stuff like that. And you don't, in the session, you kind of are having this inner dialogue with yourself, and it's not always ideal to open your eyes and write down what your parts are answering. And it's just not as a in-depth embodied experience. So, but you could totally guide yourself through it. I do it all the time. Like, I don't know, just playing ball with my dog and I'm feeling like kind of nervous. I'm like, where is this part of me that's feeling nervous? And I'll just ask it, like, what do you want? So you don't have to be in like meditative state with your eyes closed or anything.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's great to hear.
Very
Thank you for
cool.
that feedback. Yay.
Yeah, no worries. Well, thank you for your feedback on my feedback. It was a really interesting opportunity. Thank you for, you did a complimentary session for the purpose of this conversation. And like I said, I hadn't heard of this method before, and it was really, really interesting to me. And good to know that there's a book about this as well. So, for
Yes.
anyone who's wanting to look a little more in depth and is a reader, like some people absorb information better by reading as opposed to
Hmm.
doing, etc. So that would be a great resource for people. Um, I am curious, what's kind of the average, like what would you say? Because I know you get so much joy and fulfillment out of doing this work with clients. What would you say is kind of the average amount of sessions, I guess, that you experience with your clients before maybe perhaps like move on to something else,
Yeah.
or they're just kind of like, okay, I think we've worked through this.
Yeah, great question. So I have some clients that I work with just on a longer term basis. Like they're just into self-development and they're like, you know what, I'm going to book sessions with you because I know that if I don't, I'm going to put this off. And so they're just continuously working on something. I mean, I'm that way too. Like I work on some stuff as it becomes relevant to my life,
Mhm.
and then I'll work on something else, because I don't know, when you're growing a business, especially, like there's always the next level of expansion, and
Yeah.
that next level of expansion it's going to require an inner shift. So
Yes.
it's not really something that's one and done. But generally, whenever people come to me for sessions, we will do at least like one or two. So somewhere between one and three is like typical for, I would say, most things.
Hmm.
But for bigger topics that are maybe more ambiguous, like self-worth or like self-love, or I don't know, even just feeling burnt out or something like that. Like
Mhm.
those things can have a lot of elements to them.
Yeah.
And so that might mean just longer term work or like lifelong teachers. I feel like lifelong teacher patterns, meaning like something that you can pretty much like you've had it for as long as you can remember. Like procrastination is one for a lot of people.
Mm,
Or just not feeling good enough is another one for a lot of people. So there's there's always like a deeper layer. You shed a couple layers and then you're like, cool, so now I can go into this situation and not feel like a fraud. But when I go into that situation, I still feel like a fraud. So like, I don't know. There's
new level,
always
new devil, as they
right.
say. Yeah.
Especially with these bigger things that used to pose some challenges for us, like with things like biting nails or just acute anxiety or just some stress about a presentation or something like that, that can be resolved in like one session. But,
Yeah.
for you, like the habit thing that you've had since a teenager, um, those can be just need a little bit more work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, um, what was my next question? Just had a mind blank. Love that. Um,
I
what
guess
was I
that's why
gonna
you edit
say?
these episodes.
Yeah, the audio
Oh,
part anyway.
since we're kind of on a little break, maybe I
Sure.
could tell you, I didn't really talk a lot about like I kind of got into a rabbit hole of my development and stuff like that when you were asking about results. So I don't know if it would be appropriate right now to talk about some specific stuff or if we're running out of time. I don't even know how long we've been going. So but I'm happy to mention some without going into crazy detail.
Well, what I just remembered what I was gonna say before. You had mentioned earlier about, your transition from kind of like a traditional, like, being an employee to being an entrepreneur. And I feel like that could be like a whole other episode. So I'd actually love to have
Yeah.
you back to go a little
Okay.
deeper on that experience if you'd be open to
Sweet.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Okay,
Cool.
cool. Well, that sounds great. We'll definitely have you back for another session and we'll talk specifically about that because I feel like that's going to be really valuable to the audience. It's kind of something that I'm working on myself. So it'll even be valuable to me just making that transition from working for someone else to working for yourself. Because there's a lot of layers going on there, a
Yeah.
lot of things that, as you were just kind of describing, busting through and peeling back that onion. And the work never really ends.
Right, right.
So,
The
yeah,
work never
let's,
ends, and at the same time, it doesn't have to be like this daunting work that feels hard
right.
and gruesome and like it's just further levels of expansion, I could say, because work sometimes feels like something that you don't want to do or something that's hard. So,
It's a quite of a strong word, a kind of like heavy, kind of masculine kind of
mhm.
energy to it. Yeah. Um, well, this has been a great conversation. I'd love to have you back for that. In the meantime, where can people find you online?
Yeah, so my website, alinanikishina.com, and I'm also on Instagram at HeyAlinaN and also on LinkedIn a little bit.
Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all about the core transformation method, and I look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much. This was great.